Even though it was over 25 years ago, I remember the opening night of Roland Emmerich's disaster masterpiece Independence Day like it was yesterday. I was 16 and living in Orlando, Florida, and not long before I had just gotten my driver's license. This newfound freedom meant I could do things like take my dad's car, drive to the theater earlier in the day, buy tickets for the midnight show for that July 3rd, drive back to the theater a few hours before midnight, and catch a bit of shut-eye before getting in line in anticipation of the show. If all that sounds a bit weird and antiquated, it's understandable. Independence Day was from a different time in moviedom, long before the days of long-advanced online ticket sales and assigned seating. If one wanted to catch a big release, they had to be a bit more proactive. Like the days of Blockbuster Video, where one had to physically get in their car, drive to the store, and browse the aisles if they wanted to watch a home video release, going to the theater in the 90s was a much more tactile experience, and frankly, one that I miss, and one that I do think adds a very significant aspect to the enjoyment of cinema. I'm all for convenience, but there was something very satisfying about going through the hassle of all I had to do in order to be one of the first people to see Independence Day. Anticipation for the film was through the roof. Awe-inspiring images of the White House being obliterated by an alien laser blast was the highlight of some very clever movie marketing by 20th Century Fox. Roland Emmerich, the film's director, and Dean Devlin, the film's producer, who also co-wrote Independence Day with Emmerich, made big waves when their sci-fi adventure film Stargate broke through Hollywood expectations and became a hit. Wanting to make an alien invasion film, the two shopped the film to Fox, who agreed to not only finance it, but give it a giant marketing push, one that hadn't been seen since Warner Brothers spammed the entire planet with Batman marketing materials in 1989. The first of its juggernaut campaign came in the form of a 30-second teaser aired during the Super Bowl. This tactic proved so successful, other studios followed suit, and it started the by now well-known pastime of movie teasers taking over Super Bowl halftime. Several clever taglines were engineered, such as, "We've always believed we weren't alone. On July 4th, we'll wish we were." And, "Earth, take a good look, it could be your last." And, "Don't make plans for August." Tie-ins with Apple, Coors, and Coca-Cola followed suit, as well as a line of toys. All this major marketing muscle paid off, as it smashed box office record after box office record. Biggest pre-opening of all time, biggest domestic Wednesday and Thursday of all time, biggest July opening weekend, biggest 5-day opening, fastest film to reach 150 million, fastest to reach 200 million. Its grand total of 817 million, and that's in 1996 dollars, made it the second highest grossing film of all time, behind Jurassic Park. It remained Will Smith's highest grossing film for 23 years, until the live-action Aladdin remake. Independence Day was an absolute financial and cultural monster, devouring everything in its path, only losing to Jurassic Park's T-Rex. It almost single-handedly made Will Smith a movie star, and ushered in the era of the alien invasion disaster genre. But why was the film so wildly popular? I've maintained over the years that Independence Day has one of the best first acts in movie history. It is an absolute masterclass in how you build tension. The build-up before the now classic sequence of destruction handed down by the invading aliens is almost unbearable. I remember sitting in the packed midnight screening in Florida and feeling like the audience and I had become one entity. We were all acting and reacting like a energetic tidal wave completely controlled by the cinema screen and its contents laid before us. Every joke landed, every tense, suspenseful sequence had us gripping the armrests. Every touching moment hit us deep. Roland Emmerich would go on to become the butt of jokes with his not-so-critically loved disaster movies going forward, but on the night of July 3rd in 1996, his masterful execution of Independence Day's opening act was one for the ages. What is it about the film's opening act that gave the experience such power? It's become popular over the years for people to turn their noses up at the film as just silly, campy nonsense. But camp doesn't usually make nearly $1 billion at the box office. Clearly there is something driving the film's very potent engine. I've always defended the film as being extremely clever and well written, with the campy aspects being perfectly in line with the kind of tone that made the film the perfect mixture of lighthearted fun and dead seriousness. This mix of funny and serious has been successfully used in previous classics like Ghostbusters, The Goonies, An American Werewolf in London, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Terminator 2, Lethal Weapon, Poltergeist, and The Lost Boys. There is something about making an audience laugh one moment and shriek or recoil the next. The greatest weapon a filmmaker has is the audience's emotions, and the wisest filmmakers utilize this for maximum effectiveness. Even Jaws has its comedic moments. Well, the genius starts at the very beginning as the film opens with a July 2nd title card. This immediately sets in motion the idea that we are building towards a climax. The film, after all, is called Independence Day, and that day is July 4th. Opening the film 2 days before allows the audience's mind to begin to work in tense anticipation of the destruction to come later, as they've been primed to expect. This idea is further reinforced by a low rumble and a giant shadow cast over the moon, as the massive alien mothership moves toward its intended earthly target. And this moon footage isn't trivial. Over images of an American flag, we hear the famous "One Small Step for Man" speech given by Neil Armstrong as he became the first human to set foot on another celestial body. The shadow acts as an immediate confrontation and is symbolic of the alien's challenge of the human condition, embodied by Armstrong's speech and the image of the American flag and its ties to freedom. Already the audience is being primed to empathize with all of humanity who is about to face this massive external threat. It's a brilliant series of images and sounds to open the film and capture the audience's undivided attention. And then this comedic scene with the line about the beautiful woman and hitting his head, but then the tone switches with them investigating this mysterious signal to something a lot more serious. This back and forth tonal shift will become one of the film's hallmarks, and it's designed to keep the mood playful and loose, so that when something awful or suspenseful happens, everyone is caught off guard. It also goes a long way in keeping the characters likable. While likable characters is not a requirement in cinema, it does a great deal to aid in old-fashioned tension and suspense, and also keeps the stakes at maximum. The higher the stakes, the greater the audience participation. It is hard to have stakes with characters you don't care about. It should be noted that the signal emitting from the alien craft takes on the form of a low thumping vibration. A clever trick to give the alien threat an audible cue. Other movies like Aliens used this same technique to great effect. It allows the filmmakers to suggest the threat without actually showing it, and the rhythmic sound creates a kind of visceral tension deep in the gut. Next, we see military try and make sense of the craft using thermal imaging, their radar reception being impaired. This seemingly simple scene does a couple of very important things. One, it immediately gives the audience a front row seat to every aspect of the threat itself, as the military is going to have the most intel. This means there is nothing vague about the threat itself. Setting the movie purely at the level of civilians wouldn't have nearly the same tension and suspense the filmmakers are after. It also creates unease, since the military does not feel equipped to handle the threat, and the military is supposed to be our first line of defense against hostile forces. If they're confused, it means everyone else is in big trouble. Another level of suspense is achieved. We cut to the bedroom of President Whitmore as he speaks to his wife, and we meet his daughter. This scene accomplishes a few different things. One, it sets up the dynamic of the presidential family. They're lighthearted, loose, funny, and affectionate, and most importantly of all, immediately likable. Two, we are introduced to another stand-in for the alien threat that will feature prominently going forward. Television static, indicating satellite disruption. Like the low droning thump of the alien signal in the previous scene, this creates even more tension, and the beauty of it is the audience is barely aware of it on a conscious level. But subconscious manipulation is doled out by the cleverest of filmmakers. It also sets up Whitmore as an underdog, as his approval ratings are down and he's being called a wimp by the press. Since he's so likable, we now want to see him succeed in the leadership necessary to take down the alien threat. After the satellite crashes into the ship, further reinforcing its enormous size, we are introduced to David and his father. The filmmakers nicely set up the chess analogy that will play out later, while also setting up David's strained relationship with his ex-wife, his vast intelligence, and never forgetting to interject some comedy into the proceedings. David arrives at the cable company, which is in the throes of chaos over the satellite disruption. Like the military scenes, these scenes at the cable company give the audience a bird's-eye view into the entirety of the situation, from as many angles as possible, further hammering home how dire the situation is becoming and ratcheting up the tension even further. After introducing bumbling, alcoholic loser pilot Russell Case and establishing the beginning of his redemption arc, we begin to see the aliens' plan take shape as smaller craft break off from the hull and descend on the planet. The tension continues to rise. Next, the White House is beginning to descend into chaos, with the nation's leaders helpless, unable to grasp control of the situation as they get wind of the multiple craft headed their way. More military action, cross-cutting with Space Command and the White House. This frenzied cross-cutting creates a sense of momentum now, as the audience is more quickly hurled into an increasingly tense situation, and then the mysterious flaming clouds from a foreign city, giving the movie a now global sense of importance. This newly accelerated threat is ratcheted up even further with the destruction of the AWAC, with the White House now getting wind of 2 more craft spotted over the Atlantic, headed right for them. Emmerich and Devlin's storytelling at this point is masterful, juggling multiple complex elements with ease while continuing to develop important character moments and steadily increasing the tension. These television broadcasts now act as the glue that binds all of these disparate elements together, as David tries to make sense of the situation and his co-workers act as the audience, completely enraptured by the broadcasts. And then the ships finally arrive, with crowds of people staring up in awe at these gargantuan craft. Characters staring up in awe was a commonly used tactic in Steven Spielberg's filmmaking playbook of the 70s and 80s. That sense of childlike wonder at the unknown gave his films that sense of spectacle that translated to the audience and made his films so popular. Emmerich employs the same technique to similarly merge the audience with the characters in the film. The audience stares up at the massive cinema screen, much like the characters stare up at the massive spacecraft, creating a symbiosis between spectator and spectacle. The craft arriving acts as a turning point, where we are now reaching the peak of the tension, which has been steadily building with each successive scene. This unbearable tension begins spilling out into the characters as they begin to panic and run. The now abandoned cable station very clearly acting as foreshadowing for the destruction the aliens are about to leave in their wake. Everything that follows, David and his father driving to the White House, relaying his infiltrated satellite theory to the president, and the helicopters being destroyed, are the final moments of ratcheted tension that finally send the film into overdrive. The tension is so unbearable at this point that it has to be released, and it is done so through the various scenes of escape by the main characters, especially those at the White House. And then something strange happens, something interesting. The ships open up, and instead of some creepy, ominous music, Emmerich decides to make the moment almost beautiful, awe-inspiring even, with the majestic music setting the tone, suggesting a counterpoint to what's to come. Emmerich does not deny the truth here, that the opening of the craft is in fact a beautiful moment. It's awe-inspiring, and he doesn't deny that. It also creates an almost alternate reality, where for just a moment you hope the film could go in the other direction, that perhaps the aliens are in fact not hostile, but complicated, and their intentions are initially benign in nature. But alas, this is the 90s, and Emmerich doesn't have time for that shit. Movies like Speed, Twister, Jurassic Park, released only a few years earlier, were the basis of the theme of 90s cinema, unrelenting destruction, and Independence Day would be no different. In fact, it would top every single one of those movies in its efforts to completely and utterly demolish its setting. And what follows are some of the most horrifying scenes of destruction in cinema history. Myself and the audience in that theater in Florida in 1996 were absolutely stunned at the sheer tidal wave of chaos. Independence Day is funny when it needs to be, but it's also scary and horrific when it needs to be, and it doesn't flinch, not for a second. These types of films that balance comedy and seriousness, without one infecting the other, but each one being exactly what it needs to be, perhaps was never better exemplified in 90s cinema. Movies back then seemed to master the art of balancing tone. Modern cinema seems to be an either-or proposition, be completely stone-faced or completely funny. Or rather, today's movies are very specific in their choice of genre, not daring to stray from it, while movies in the 90s weren't afraid to mix and match, injecting a film with just enough comedy to lighten the mood and create likable characters, but also not flinching when it was time to get serious. To this day, Independence Day remains the textbook example of how to balance various tones. Sometimes it's a comedy, sometimes it's an intriguing political drama, sometimes it's a horror movie, sometimes it's an action extravaganza, and sometimes it's all about disaster porn. But it's always great cinema. If you enjoyed this video, consider hitting the like and subscribe button, as I'll be posting more content in the future. Thanks for watching.